Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Of the many saints we could hope to emulate, Pope John Paul II stands apart for his excellence in leadership. Not only was he Pope of the Roman Catholic Church at a very difficult time in church and world history, but his 26-year-long pontificate was marked by incredible achievements, changes, and unique global impact. In this third of our series on leadership lessons from the saints, we unpack several lessons from the life and teachings of this master in humanity. Hello, everybody. Welcome back again. I'm glad to be continuing this series with you on the leadership lessons from the saints, especially because today I want to talk about one of my favorite saints personally, who is Pope John Paul II. And I know not everybody who listens to this is Catholic, but everybody who listens to this can understand the power of the leadership that this person, this Pope, exuded in our world. I'm thinking, for example, of a story where they asked Billy Graham what he thought of Pope John Paul II. And Billy Graham said, "He is a pope who knows how to pope." Meaning, regardless of whatever theological content there is out there, he recognized the leadership of this man. This is a pope who knows how to pope, right? And there's a lot we can learn. Whenever we look at popes in particular, you're looking at a unique kind of leader. A pope, for example, has to not only be spiritual, but has to bring the power of spirituality into forums that are purely secular. I mean, he's rubbing shoulders with global leaders, trying to shape decisions to be for the best. He spoke at the United Nations, for example, multiple times, spoke in front of Congress. He went in front of the federal governments of multiple countries. On top of that, he had to work with NGOs. He had to work with political movements. I mean, that's not even talking about how each individual expects from that Pope an absolute, stellar example of love and humor and humanity. He needs to be able to relate with every single person because he governs not only an institution, but he governs an institution like a father. I mean, it's a very demanding job. I think it's a great spot for us to go and look to find some leadership lessons. How did he do it? How was he at the same time so influential and wield so much power in the world and in a worldly way, and at the same time be completely dedicated to God and the Blessed Virgin Mary? How did he do it? Because we have to do the same thing, you see. I'm expecting you to be able to form yourself so deeply in your faith that everything that you do flows from the heart of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. But then at the same time, we want you to be powerful in the sense of wielding the influence that you have for the good. But to do that, we have to strike a balance. And it's something that I find a lot of people struggle with. My work with the St. John Leadership Network, I constantly am coming across people who are saying the biggest problem that they have is, how do I bring faith into a secularized environment? And it can be your businesses, yes, but I also find it in terms of society. I mean, like your friendships. When all of your friends are kind of religiously neutral, or at best, or sometimes maybe slightly hostile, and yet they're good people and they're trying, and you like them, and this is your social circle, how do you show your faith? I remember one time being in front of a group of people and I challenged them. I said, you all should put a statue of the Virgin Mary in your front yard, right? And I made a little joke. I said, if you're going to put a goose in your front yard or some sort of bird, the least you could do is put the Mother of God in your front yard. And in some crowds that goes over real well, and people go out and buy statues of Mary and put them in their front yards. And I think that that's great because, people sometimes say, what are people going to think? If you put, well, maybe they'll think you're Catholic, maybe that's not such a bad thing. You remind people of hope and of beauty and of God's presence in our world in a very simple way. Anyway, I was saying this to another crowd. It didn't go over really well because the people kind of, looked at each other. And afterwards, one of them came up to me and explained. He said, listen, my HOA would never accept that. I'd be fined by my HOA. And then all of my neighbors would turn against me. And he was legitimately concerned. But it goes to show you just how much social pressure is on us. Because if you can't even put a statue of the Virgin Mary in your front yard, there's no way that you're going to do other things like stand up for the teachings of Christ, in the public schools when the school board's voting on issues of radical change. Or maybe you won't be able to stand up for the rights of the unborn when it comes to how you look and vote. And then, of course, the same thing happens with our kids. We end up getting children that don't take any stances. And it's all because foundationally, we say, I don't know what impact my faith can really have. If I'm going to be influential in the world, I have to leave my faith at the door. And I want to challenge that. There are some circumstances where you can't overtly speak about your faith. But if you're not able to live a life that flows from your faith, really and truly, in every decision that you make, if you're not able to do that, then I wonder if your faith is real to begin with. I'm just going to challenge you on that. Because at the same time, if you're not working out of your faith, it's like, what good does that faith have, says St. James. You need to have good works flowing from your faith. You need to find a way to reconcile this. And I think that Pope John Paul II gives us a great example of a person who was completely devoted to his faith, completely. And then at the same time, worked for the rights of human beings and the transformation of culture in a way that was effective in the real world. When you look at his life, for example, one of the stories people often speak about John Paul II is how they would find him in prayer in the morning. When you'd come in for his private mass, which I think was at 7 a.m., there in St. Peter's, he had a private chapel where a few people were allowed every day to attend his mass. When you came through the door, he was already there at 6 in the morning on his knees praying. And you would pray with the Pope for an hour before Mass. And the prayer was in silence, kneeling in front of the tabernacle. And they said that the Pope would kind of groan or sigh as he prayed on his knees for as long as he could, of course, until he got too old, but kneeling there, praying for the world. There's a story that at the very beginning of his pontificate, when he was, there, the secretaries were looking for him to come to a meeting, and they found him in the chapel, laying down with his arms spread out against the ground, laying on the ground and prostrate in front of God in prayer. There's stories about how he would stop at various statues or pictures and just stand there and pray, sometimes being late even for the meeting because the prayer came first. Just like St. Joan of Arc, who always said, God is the first one we serve. God is first in line, right? That's what she used to say. He was all in. His spirituality came first and he put time behind it. And yet at the same time, he was one of the most relatable popes in modern history. The people loved him. People spoke with him, laughed with him. He had a vulnerability to him that drew people in. He's simply a charming figure. And he had an ability to relate with everyone that he would meet. This was borne witness to. One of his Swiss guards, for example, was a young man that John Paul II spent time kind of coaching along on the side. So as he would pass him in the hallway, he would stop and talk with this Swiss guard. And the Swiss guard said his life was completely changed, and he now serves in various capacities, developing leadership in the church. And it's all because he was coached in leadership by this Pope who took time with him. He was just a man of great humanity. And that humanity is what he laid out as the course of the way he was going to lead the world. And I think here is the point. When we take upon ourselves the challenge of bringing our faith into the workplace or our faith into the secular world, which, by the way, is our challenge. We absolutely have to do this. It's called evangelization. It's called being a Christian in the world. And yet at the same time, when we try to do this, we say, what's our pathway? How am I supposed to do this if faith is not something that we all share? We need to look for another pathway, something that we do all share. And what John Paul II showed us is that we all share humanity. We all share the same aspirations of the heart, the same desires deep down inside for what is good and true and beautiful. And if we can meet the people there, we can then lead them to a God who is the best of all things, who is the truest of all things, and the most beautiful of all things. You see, you start with that desire. You start with humanity. You start with people where they are in common with you, and then you lead them deeper. It's a wonderful lesson in evangelization, but there are many stories of his life that go to prove this.
The St. John Institute has a special invitation for our lady listeners. Escape to the Rocky Mountains on our 4-day Women's Fall Colors Retreat, September 29th through October 2nd, where you'll have the opportunity to examine what leadership looks like in the context of the feminine genius as spouse, mother, sister, daughter, and friend. Spend time with our Lord in Mass, adoration, and confession, and hike the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. Be pampered with good meals, beautiful scenery, and great friends. Visit stjohninstitute.org to sign up. We look forward to seeing you.
Speaking about the leadership of John Paul II, it's a wild ride, right? There is so much to talk about here and so many wonderful stories. And I just want to start by, speaking about the fact that before he was even Pope, this was a man who invested himself in knowledge. And I'm thinking of my friends in the military, many of whom, speak about how when they're promoted in the Marines or in the Army, there's a reading list of books that they're required to read. And not only military people, but I'm speaking of CEOs or executives of big companies that I've met who have told me that they have to read incessantly, that reading is just a necessary action for anyone who's devoted to leadership. Well, I think it was the same for John Paul II, right? He was named the auxiliary bishop of Krakow in 1958, right? But by that time, he already had 2 doctorate degrees. Not only that, but he was a playwright. He'd written entire plays. He was an absolute master in the Polish language and in the history of his country. And he had done all that learning, or at least a lot of it, while the Nazis had occupied his country. He was studying to become a priest and reading all these books while he was working at a chemical plant and in basic, economic slavery under the occupying forces of the Nazis. And then after that, under the communists. And yet he pursued it. That lesson of knowledge is just absolutely key, because our leadership is going to depend upon our vision, and our vision is expanded by what we know of those who've gone before us and what we know of the field that we're handling. I mean, when you go back and you read his speeches, for example, in Poland, when he would go back under the communist regime, the Pope would oftentimes refer to figures in Polish history and in Polish literature that then he would use as a benchmark and as an example to make his point. Meaning when you want to bring someone into faith, you need to meet them in their humanity. Well, what do you know of their history? What do you know of the trials that they've carried? What do you know about the heart and the culture of that person who's in front of you? And you see, that's exactly what John Paul II did. He would meet the humanity of the people. He would meet their history, their desire, their beauty, their arts. And then it's there that then he would say, Christ wants that and Christ has come for that. When he went to different countries, for example, he would come off the plane, and the first thing that he would do, and it's very famous, of course, in pictures and everything, whenever he came to a country for the first time, he would kneel down and kiss the ground as a sign of respect for the country that he was coming to. That this land, he was coming to not transform it from the outside, but to embrace it on the inside, to embrace humanity with the love of the Redeemer. This is, of course, the name even of his first encyclical, because as he says so well, the pathway of the church is the human person, the who we are. And so that shows us something. When you're struggling, like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do in this situation? How am I supposed to bring my faith out in public and different? Meet humanity with genuine humanity. Understand where they're coming from. It's just a matter of saying, I'm not going to bow and water down the truth of what we could have. Instead, I'm going to invite you into something higher. In a sense, Christianity makes us up our game as citizens, up our game as true humans. I mean, if you're gossiping and lying and telling jokes that you ought not to tell, you're not being genuinely human. I mean, if you really want to be great, be truly human. Meaning live according to what is right and true and beautiful. Push things upward, right? You don't even have to mention God right off the bat. But boy, you do need to live as if your heart mattered, as if your body mattered. Being infused, in other words, with the values of Christ. living with him inside of you, you create a culture around you that influences everyone else for what is good without even mentioning necessarily the name of Christ. Now, I hope you do. I mean, that's even better. And we need to as soon as we can in the relationship. And yet at the same time, the pathway that the gospel walks is the pathway of the human heart. Knowing, loving, and embracing the best of the people around us is the key. And this is what John Paul II shows us. Just think, for example, about in 1983. If you remember, on May 13th, 1981, Pope John Paul II was shot by this man. Literally shot. There's a terrible picture you can see where the pistol is a matter of a few feet away from the body of the Pope. And the bullet missed his main artery by millimeters. The doctors were marveling. And so too did the assassin. Aliaka said, "I never miss." And so Aliaka felt, oh my goodness, perhaps it is that this man was being protected by God because there's no reason he should be alive. And yet John Paul II survived. Well, what did he do in 1983? Most of us would, carry a grudge, to say the least, as that person was put into prison. And there's a very famous video, you can go and watch it, where you see John Paul II going toward him, sitting down with him in the prison cell and forgiving him and letting him know that he forgave him. In the year 2000, the Italian government granted clemency to Acca because the Pope John Paul II himself requested that he be let out of prison. So he only did 17 years of prison time for trying to kill a pope, a leader, assassinate an international leader. And it was because the Pope himself asked that he be set free. Aliaka never became Christian. He just left and went back to his homeland. And yet you have here an example of what it means to lead. I meet people where they're at, and I meet them with a genuine humanity, man to man, human to human. I forgive you in the name of my God who died for you, but I forgive you. And that meeting from the heart that would go so far as to even get him out of prison early. It's just an incredible statement to all of us. I mean, would my people be able to say that they've seen that kind of heart from me? Would the people that follow me, that work for me, would they be able to say that they've seen that kind of vulnerability and truth? Have I met them where they're at? Or do I stay in some sort of ivory tower somewhere, removed from them? It's a challenge for us. But when we can meet the people with the heart, all of the beauty that God has put into our heart can then be communicated to theirs. But we have to be willing to go there. When you think about when he was first elected, he stood at the window. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but he was fluent in 12 different languages. And he went through just about all of them, right? Greeting the people of the world in their own language. He even made some jokes about how he's making mistakes, as he says this or that, And the people laughed. The people loved him. They responded to him because he was showing that he was genuinely relatable. Relatable, why? Because he was human. Not necessarily just in what's bad. That's not what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on what was good. I mean, do you know, for example, every Christmas, he would gather with the Polish seminarians in Rome, and they would sing the old Polish Christmas carols of his youth. And they would make, cookies and Polish, delights and all these different things. And they would carry on a genuinely Polish Christmas right there in the heart of the Vatican. And he would do it with the Polish seminarians of his country. Why? Because Christmas is a good thing, and celebrating these beautiful traditions in a very human way. It was necessary for him. It was part and parcel of who he was. He shows us that humanity and expressing it is a powerful tool for us to connect with our people, to be with them, and to then transform them from within.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
One couldn't really do justice to speaking of the leadership lessons of John Paul II if we didn't also speak about the ways that he was extraordinarily courageous. Extraordinarily. For example, when he started to take on the mafia, and he called out the Sicilian mafia, telling them that their souls were at jeopardy, that they would go to hell for what they were doing, literally. I mean, it was a pretty dramatic speech. And then the mafia exploded a car bomb outside of the embassy there in Rome. The national security forces of Italy came to see the Holy Father and said that they wanted him to start to wear a bulletproof vest whenever he spoke, because there were credible, reasons to think that he would be assassinated. And he'd already been shot once. Already shot to the point of almost dying in 1981. And so they said this is going to happen again. And John Paul II prayed about it and then came back and laid the bulletproof vest back on their desk. And he said no. He refused to do so. He just entrusted himself to the hand of God and to God's mercy. And even more, he didn't want to show that he was afraid of them. One time he was warned of retaliation from government officials that he was challenging about their positions. And he said, I'm not afraid of them. They're afraid of me, right? That's a really profound statement when you think about it. The Pope's saying, I'm not afraid of them attacking. They're afraid of me, which is why they want to attack to begin with. He kept the upper hand of courage. And that upper hand he then used, and he used marvelously to stand firm for his belief in the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. Writing all about that, about the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman as God's plan. He met with leaders on both sides in the Middle East to try to broker a peace. He met personally with Mikhail Gorbachev, if you remember that one. Became the first pope to ever enter a mosque. And wherever he went defending human rights and genuine humanity. And I think that this is a real lesson for us, right? Because when you think about why you are in the position that you are in, you're there for a reason. God has gifted each one of us with talents and skills, and sometimes with external possessions and even with popularity, in order that we serve him there as his instrument, as his disciple, as his follower. And when we do that, great things can happen, but it won't happen without our courage. It's not that it's supposed to be easy, right? It's supposed to be hard because we're laboring for salvation in the footsteps of the Lord. Maybe it's not so much the ability to enjoy comfort that's important as it is the courage to do hard things, to dare great things for Christ. I think this is something that we can all take with us when we contemplate, what does he teach us? He teaches us that our connectivity with our followers is as important as our passion and drive for the one we serve. Our drive forward has to be coupled with a connectivity to everyone who's behind us. We have to be as connected with the people that we serve as we are with the Lord, or the end goal that we're trying to reach. This balance point is not easy to find, and yet it's essential for us who are trying to lead and lead well, which means that there is also time for silence and for prayer. When John Paul II, for example, he spent 10% in total of his time away from the Vatican. Literally one day in 10, he was gone. He journeyed to over 100 countries while being Pope. Over 100 countries. That shows you the extent of his travels. And when he would go places, he would pray there. And I find that that's very interesting. He would go on his outreach to a different culture, different people, and then he would lead them in prayer. I remember, for example, when he came to Giant Stadium in 1993, I was there, as a matter of fact, for his Mass. And they had the largest crowd in the history of Giant Stadium up until that point. It was something like 82,000 people had come in the pouring rain. And John Paul II did one thing. He didn't give a long discourse. There was no, rock concert that was happening. He gathered us in order to offer Holy Mass. And in the pouring rain, and I was there, I know personally, the rain was coming down. John Paul II, underneath a covered altar, offered the sacrifice of the Mass for us. It was as if he was leading us to God by living that communion with him out in front of us. And of course, this is a communion with God that was nourished by a lot of deep, intense personal prayer on his own. He also made a yearly retreat. He withdrew for times of prayer and solitude with God. And we need to do the same. One of the reasons why I think it's so hard for us to integrate our faith with the rest of our lives is simply because we don't feed our faith enough. We don't take enough time to pray. And because of that, we lose the track of where we're going. And you know what happens in the end? We lose our sense for what genuine humanity really is. Instead of meeting people at their greatness, we just meet them wherever they're at and we stay with them. We lower the message down instead of bringing the people up. And it's because we ourselves have not taken the time to feed ourselves on that end goal. But then on the other hand, his relational ability was exceptional. Popes used to, for example, eat by themselves. It was just kind of like a time where they withdrew and no one would eat with a pope. It was just seemed to be, a lack of respect for the height of his office. And that changed with John Paul II. He would have working lunches, even working dinners with people. And it was a very famous kind of technique that he would use. He'd say, I'll meet you for lunch, come on over. And then you would eat lunch with the Pope while you worked with him. That was a remarkable change. He would insist on driving around in the Pope mobile, if you remember that famous expression, to greet the crowds at great length in the hot sun. I myself witnessed him one time doing just that for a good hour, if not longer, driving through the millions of young people that had gathered in Rome to see him in the heat of the day. And he wanted to connect with people. He wanted them to know that he was close to them. Whenever they'd see a baby in the crowd, he would famously go over, and greet the mother. And then, of course, you've got the married couples. If you had your marriage done in the course of the last year, he started to bless all of the marriages. They'd line up in their bridal gowns and in their suits in order to come forward and have a picture taken with John Paul II as he blessed their marriages. He was one with the people because he was one with God. It's not that it was always easy. There's times, for example, where he would get angry. There's a few famous examples where he really seemed to lose his temper while he was speaking. And one time someone asked him, they said, John Paul II, is it okay to get angry? And he said, well, it is, just never in public. And it's true, whenever he did finally get angry in public, everyone would, the cameras would roll because it was really something to see. But he also knew how to take care of himself. When for example, he put a pool in his a vacation spot that he would go to as Pope during the summer at a place called Castel Gandolfo, and someone said, Holy Father, don't you think this is expensive? And he says, it doesn't cost as much as the election of a new Pope, meaning I've got to take care of myself at the same time. Yeah, there's a common sense about John Paul II that's appealing, and it's a great example for all of us to take care of ourselves while we meet the people where they're at with a genuine humanity, all done for the love of God and the salvation of the world. It's exactly the path that you and I can walk as well.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.